Food prices have steadily ticked upwards at grocery stores across the U.S. in recent months. If you compare last August to this August, prices across the board are up 4.5%, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And in some regions, prices are even higher. For cities, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that the cost of meat, poultry, fish, and eggs is up 15% since the start of 2020. Experts are saying that this unusual jump is due to rising labor costs and supply chain issues caused by the pandemic. Unfortunately, these inflated price tags are not expected to go down anytime soon. So, what does this mean? For Americans in the middle class, this increase is frustrating, but they're able to get by. However, for low-income people working minimum wage jobs, it's unsustainable and means further cuts to an already pared-down grocery list.
Wealthier families actually spend so little of their income on food, something like 10%, versus low-income families are already spending about a third of their money on food each month. So these rising food prices actually present a really serious issue, and they also expose, I think, a truth that's existed for years, but we don't talk about it, and that's that rising food prices and the rising cost of living in general have been an issue for low-income families because neither food assistance benefits nor wages have really increased at the same pace of food prices for a long time, and now especially with the surges that we're seeing.
That's Dr. Priya Fielding Singh, a sociologist and assistant professor in the Department of Family and Consumer Studies at the University of Utah. She's also the author of the new book, How the Other Half Eats.
When you are food insecure, when you're not sure that you're going to be able to gather enough food for yourself or for your children, you're going to prioritize maximizing calories and quantity, because the last thing that you want to happen is that you run out of food and there's nothing to feed your child that night. But what that does is often the most calorically dense, energy dense, and cheapest foods are the least healthy. And so what the experience of food insecurity does, what having to go through that does, is it puts a parent in a really difficult position where they're making trade-offs and oftentimes they're incentivized to buy less healthy food because they can get more of it.
She says that food assistance programs like SNAP and WIC aimed at low-income families are not enough and continue to fall further behind as food prices rise.
About 80% of SNAP dollars are used up within the first 2 weeks of a month. And what then parents are left with is that they have the remaining 2 weeks where they're trying to make ends meet and trying to maximize the amount that they can get on a very small amount of money. And again, this leads parents very economically, rationally to choose to buy the foods that are less healthy, but also more affordable, and also, really importantly, foods that they know their kids will like and eat.
The last thing anyone wants to do is waste food. For parents who are strapped for money and time, it's easier to go with the options that they know will be eaten. This often means purchasing less produce and more processed foods at the store. Another resource that people rely on to round out their grocery supply is the local food bank. In research for her book, Fielding Singh spent many hours with several low-income families dealing with food insecurity.
There was a view of food banks as something that one went to when there was truly no other option. I spoke with low-income mothers who told me who had run out of their SNAP benefits, had run out of their WIC benefits, and even so, they told me, no, I don't want to take that food because someone who really needs it could use it. So I think that speaks to just kind of the perception of what food banks are for. They really are considered among low-income families to be an emergency. And there's also, as we know, a stigma around using food banks.
Despite this stigma around food banks, more Americans are using this resource in recent years. Zuwani Villarreal is the Director of Communication at Feeding America and says that last year many pantries and shelters saw record demand during the peak of the pandemic. Feeding America is a nonprofit organization that has a network of 200 food banks across the country, feeding more than 46 million people each year. She says that there is still stigma around going to a food pantry and getting help, but this is slowly changing.
I think one of the things that the pandemic did was, in a way, in the form of equalizer, because families saw all over the country, people were being affected by these closures and job losses, and many, many people turned to food banks, many for the first time. So last year, Feeding America estimates that about 60 million people, or 1 in 5 people, turned to the charitable food sector for assistance. And in our early reporting from food banks, we estimated that about 4 out of every 10 families were new to food assistance, had never needed help before.
Valeriel points out that as food prices rise across the U.S., food banks are a good place for low-income people to get more expensive items, like fresh produce, poultry, and dairy.
I think the biggest misconception is that food banks distribute non-perishable food items, or exclusively non-perishable, like canned goods. But the fact is that about more than 2/3 of the items that we distribute as a food bank network is classified as promoting good health. They are lean meats, dairy, eggs, produce, healthy fruits and vegetables. We work with the ag industry to recover and rescue delicious and nutritious product, and a lot of that goes out into the communities through these food pantries.
Fielding Singh points out that sometimes the offerings at food pantries can be quite niche, like a specific flavor of yogurt or packaged rice that went unsold at the grocery store. It can also be excess produce or meat that some families have never cooked with before and are unfamiliar with. However, Valeriel says more food banks are trying to diversify options so that there's something for everyone. And many locations also offer holiday items, as Thanksgiving is just around the corner.
In the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving, food banks will be doing turkey distributions and providing all the trimmings, because we know food is so important, not only to feed our bodies, but to feed our souls and feed our spirits.
So how can you help people dealing with food insecurity? Consider making a donation to your local food bank or volunteering your time this holiday season.
Everybody does have a role to play. Foundations and corporations can support Feeding America. They can support their local food bank to continue to provide that food and source that nutritious food. Volunteers are a crucial part of a food bank operation and pantry operation, so we encourage, if you're healthy and you're safe and you're comfortable enough, to continue to volunteer. And then, of course, raising awareness about the issue. As we talked about stigma, helping families understand that food banks are here to help.
To learn more about food insecurity, how to help this season, and our guests, Dr. Priya Fielding Singh and Zovani Valerial, visit viewpointsradio.org. For more behind the scenes, search Viewpoints Radio on Twitter and Facebook. This segment was written and produced by Amira Zaveri. I'm Gary Price.
Flu season is here, and flu is similar enough to COVID-19 to create dangerous confusion. SARS-CoV-2 can result in more serious illness, but initial symptoms are often similar: fever and chills, a cough, runny nose, and shortness of breath. COVID-19 seems to spread more easily than flu, and people are often contagious longer. Dr. Manoj Gandhi, Senior Medical Director at Thermo Fisher Scientific, says, unfortunately, you can't tell the difference by symptoms alone.
Simultaneous testing for SARS-CoV-2 and influenza viruses is essential. Multiplex PCR technology allows for testing of multiple viruses and co-infections at the same time, which provides proper diagnosis, reduces transmission of COVID-19, monitors the spread of both COVID-19 and flu, and saves valuable testing resources.
Multi-pathogen PCR testing helps drive swift and accurate treatment decisions to help simultaneously manage flu season and the COVID-19 pandemic. Find out more at thermofisher.com/COVID-flu information.
More than 80% of people say that vision is the most important sense. So why do about half of us skip our annual eye exam? Dr. Valerie Sheedy-Pallone, optometrist and Vice President of Eye Care Solutions at VSP Vision Care, shares why you should book a comprehensive eye exam, even if your eyes feel fine.
Comprehensive eye exams are more than just visual correction. They can also help detect signs of underlying chronic health conditions like diabetes, which show no obvious symptoms, especially in its early stages, which is why catching these diseases sooner with the help of an eye exam is so crucial. Your eye doctor can tell you more about your overall health than you may ever know. We do that by dilating your pupils or using non-invasive technology to look at the blood vessels in the back of your eye.
VSP Vision Care is the only not-for-profit vision benefits company in the U.S. and has been a leader in health-focused vision care. Schedule a comprehensive eye exam with an eye doctor today. It's easy to find one near you at VSP.com. That's VSP.com.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.
Coming up on Viewpoints.
It's a common shock that has caused people to ask lots of questions about how they spend their time and what they value and what they trust and where they are valued.
How has the pandemic fed into the labor shakeup and shortage? Then,
we really only understand a very tiny bit of the universe, and we're still asking really basic questions like, where did the universe come from, and what is it made out of, and how will it end?
Exploring the vast expanse of our endless universe. I'm Marty Peterson.
and I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.